Hiya folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness, joining me for another episode of Strange Tales. Today I want to use this video to take you on a little journey, a short journey through the proverbial dark heart of Hollywood, through the realms of science fiction actually in this case, one where all the signposts lead to the Hollywood Hills region of Santa Monica Mountains and into a strange little neighbourhood called Laurel Canyon. It almost sounds like the introduction to a Twilight Zone episode, doesn't it? Perhaps I should have my trademark Rod Serling cigarette for this one. The Laurel Canyon story is far too convoluted to wholly document here in this video. Before I take you on this little sci-fi journey through Laurel Canyon, I want to just point out a few things about Laurel Canyon. The region was and still is somewhat home to the darlings of the American culture industry, such as famous actors, musicians, writers, politicians, personalities, that sort of thing. During the 1960s, the anti-war counterculture spurred the powers that be types of the world into open warfare with those masses objected to American foreign policy, racism, corruption, and Laurel Canyon became like a petri dish for psyops, counterintelligence operations, mind control, drug experimentation, the occult, satanic rituals and practices. The list goes on and on and on. The Laurel Canyon scene also included many trademarks of the US military, National Security Agency, the CIA, the FBI, NASA, and more. For a lot of people out there, Laurel Canyon will be most infamous because of its association with the Manson family and the murder of the likes of Sharon Tate. There are three author researchers that I highly recommend you checking out on this subject. One is Dave McGowan, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. Another is Peter Lavender, particularly his Sinister Forces trilogy of books. And another one is Mark Devlin, his Musical Truth trilogy. Those researchers and their books will get you a lot closer to the truth of Laurel Canyon. But one thing that doesn't get covered a huge amount in alternative knowledge research is the science fiction connections to Laurel Canyon. There are multiple names that crop up in association with the canyon. One person that lived there for a number of years was Orson Welles, responsible for the infamous media psyop, the 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast, which I cover in my book Media Psyop. Other denizens of the region were people like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, who is tangentially connected to the Lookout Mountain Studios in Laurel Canyon. That's a subject for a much longer video than I have got time for today. But the thing that fascinates me the most about the Laurel Canyon science fiction connection are these little tidbits of stories, these little 6 degrees of separation of things that happen sometimes. One of the most interesting ones that I came across was this synchronicity between The Fearless Vampire Killers, the film that starred Sharon Tate, being shot at Borehamwood at exactly the same time that Stanley Kubrick was working on 2001, A Space Odyssey. And you had this normally blonde-haired Sharon Tate being asked by Roman Polanski to wear a red wig, immortalising this idea of the Scarlet Woman, as it were. When I was researching all of these connections for my book Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda Volume 2, it was the film Rosemary's Baby was actually the starting point of my research into the myriad of all the connections that I found. Rosemary's Baby put director Roman Polanski, and because of his relationship with Sharon Tate I suppose as well, on the global celebrity map at the time. The film is one of those that is readily cited as an example of a Hollywood film portraying ritualised practices and at least loosely the involvement of minors in such rituals. And given that Stanley Kubrick also traded in those cinematic themes, I wasn't actually that surprised to learn via Kubrick researcher and author Michael Cement that Kubrick was a big fan of Rosemary's Baby, and that's subsequently been confirmed by Kubrick's brother-in-law Jan Harlan. Rosemary's Baby is noted as being evocative of Aleister Crowley's Babylon Alamantra working. Similar observation, albeit more convoluted, has been made about 2001 A Space Odyssey. In the latter film there are a succession of lunar solar planetary alignments prompted by the appearance of the monolith that creates eclipses, and the result is the eventual appearance of the Starchild entity. Some researchers discuss the Moonchild, forever associated with Aleister Crowley in relation to the Sunchild, the Sun King, Horus. The Sun is of course a star, so natural progression of the Moonchild, Sunchild is the Starchild. So the film has been often cited as an evocation ritual. I also came across this fascinating article that pointed out the plot point for the seriously strange 1980s kids sci-fi fantasy film The Never-Ending Story, and in order for the hero Bastian to save the fantasy world of Fantasia, he has to give a name to the nameless child princess ruler in the film. He gives her the name of his dead mother, the name Moonchild. 2001: A Space Odyssey and Rosemary's Baby were released relatively close together, April 2nd and June the 12th, I think it was, of 1968 respectively. Co-star of 2001: A Space Odyssey, Gary Lockwood, who actually had a pad in Laurel Canyon that was noted by Robert Vaughan in his book A Fortunate Life. At least in the mid-60s he was living there. And a firm fixture of the Laurel Canyon scene was a cult film director and friend actually of Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, Donald Camel. Donald Camel directed Anita Pallenberg, another close friend of Sharon Tate I should say, and Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones in the film Performance. Pallenberg was, for many, many years of her life, up to and including her death, a devout occultist. Camel also directed the Julie Christie sci-fi horror vehicle Demon Seed, very, very strange film from 1977. It's also another transhuman, occult, alchemical retelling of Crowley's Alamantral ritual. Please check out the film. It's a very disturbing film, but it's an interesting watch. According to the article Donald Camel, Senses of Cinema, after Performance, Camel wrote a script called Ishtar that was to feature William Burroughs as a judge kidnapped on holiday in Morocco. Like most of the scripts he worked on, it remained unproduced. The researcher Peter Lavender in his Sinister Forces Book 3 described the film as being about the Babylonian goddess returning to Earth. William Burroughs has often been slotted into the category of a science fiction writer. I think some of his stuff is. A lot of people say that he isn't. I think William Burroughs actually didn't like being called a science fiction writer either. But that's another interesting synchronicity there. Donald Camel's father, Charles J. Camel, was the very first biographer of Aleister Crowley. Donald Camel played the role of Osiris in Kenneth Anger's occult soap Lucifer Rising, which was produced by Anita Pallenberg. Kenneth Anger was heavily influenced by Aleister Crowley's Thelema belief system, and his film inauguration of the Pleasure Dome featured Jack Parsons' wife and one-time Scarlet Woman Marjorie Cameron. During his time in prison, Charles Manson studied the teachings of Scientology, another somewhat distant connections to the likes of Jack Parsons, Aleister Crowley, the Alamantral ritual, via L. Ron Hubbard as well. I'll come back to Manson in a moment. Kenneth Anger became one of the Rolling Stones entourage and travelled with them on tour. The Rolling Stones hit Sympathy for the Devil features strange woo-woo backing vocals in it. Those were performed by Anita Pallenberg and Marianne Faithfull. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger were respectively Pallenberg and Faithfull's lovers at the time. Again, according to Peter Lavender in Sinister Forces Book 3, around 1967 there was to be a planned film version of Anthony Burgess's novel A Clockwork Orange 1962, which was to be based on a screen treatment by satirist Terry Southern and British photographer Michael Cooper. Cooper and the Rolling Stones were reportedly upset by the move, and it was decided to return to the original plan in which Mick Jagger, the lead vocalist of the Rolling Stones, would play Alex DeLarge with the rest of the Stones as his Droog gang. The production was shelved after Britain's chief censor, the Lord Chamberlain, indicated that he would not permit it to be made. And that's something of a slightly bonkers synchronicity, as it's known that Terry Southern, who was a noted Canyonite, subsequently convinced Stanley Kubrick to make A Clockwork Orange. That also ties Mick Jagger into any number of equations there because of the whole music scene that was going on in Laurel Canyon and the whole associated connections with that. One little thing to point out there as well, that Mick Jagger appeared in the science fiction action flick Free Jack that was directed by Jeff Murphy. Murphy also helmed the sci-fi cult classic The Quiet Earth, which I have a video about on this channel where myself and Dan Ryan talk about things to do with Saturn worship, free energy and things like that in the film. We also talk about how great a film it is as well, because it is a very, very good film. Now let's move on here to David Hemmings, who appeared as Sharon Tate's brother in Eye of the Devil. He was considered for the role of Alex DeLarge in the initial version of A Clockwork Orange. Hemmings went on to play Dildano alongside Anita Pallenberg and Jane Fonda in the kitsch sci-fi romp Barbarella. Fonda and Sharon Tate were, like others previously mentioned, close friends. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it here, but Jane Fonda, along with Barbarella director and then husband Roger Vadim, hosted a party at the Tate Polanski Laurel Canyon residence just hours before Sharon Tate's death. And this whole idea of dinner before death, it does appear to have something of a motif where Laurel Canyon's concerned, specifically where Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski are concerned as well, because on the 5th of June 1968, prior to being fatally wounded at the Ambassador Hotel, Los Angeles, by should we say Sirhan, Robert F. Kennedy hosted a dinner party at Malibu Beach house of the film director John Frankenheimer. Although it's fiercely refuted by many sources, others have recalled Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski being at that particular party. Note here as well that John Frankenheimer, perhaps most famous for directing the likes of the 1962 MK Ultra themed The Manchurian Candidate, that film starred Frank Sinatra, once husband of Rosemary's Baby star Mia Farrow. A number of alleged mind control victims have maintained that Frank Sinatra was involved with the real CIA orchestration of MK Ultra. Make of that what you will. But the film's director, John Frankenheimer, he was long suspected of having a CIA affiliation. Certainly, if you look at the nature of some of his films, such as The Manchurian Candidate, Seconds, 7 Days in May, The Gypsy Moths, The French Connection 2, Black Sunday, The Holocaust Covenant, Year of the Gun, Ronan, they seem to allude to that. There are all manner of Laurel Canyon connections there, like the victim, Abigail Volger, worked on Robert Kennedy's political campaign in 1968. The Cielo Drive murders, RFK's death was equally bizarre, loaded with inconsistent evidence. I'm going to go into a load of seemingly disconnected, but they are connected, synchronicities and connections here now. Mia Farrow and Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were all close with the members of the legendary musical group the Beatles. One of their songs on the White Album is the John Lennon penned song Dear Prudence. Prudence Farrow became obsessed with meditation techniques and practices of the yogi, barely left her room for about 3 weeks allegedly. Family and friends became concerned. They tried to coax her out. John Lennon penned the song Dear Prudence as a means to coax her out of her state and out of her room. One factor that will forever be connected there with Mia Farrow and Roman Polanski to John Lennon is the exterior location of Rosemary's apartment in Rosemary's Baby. The Dakota building, the building was renamed the Bramford in Rosemary's Baby. The inspiration for the original novel was the Alwyn Court Apartments, 180 West 58th Street, where author Ira Levin had once lived. The Dakota building also featured heavily in Jack Finney's 1970s sci-fi novel Time and Again, and that novel tells the story of Simon Morley, an advertising executive working in New York City who's recruited for a secret US Army project to achieve time travel. The Dakota building was also the home of Beatle John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono, and at the beginning of Rosemary's Baby, an elderly couple mentioned that a man was shot outside the lobby of the building, and just over 10 years later, Lennon was allegedly shot and killed by another, shall we say, Mark David Chapman, just outside the front entrance of the same building. Numerous alternative knowledge researchers assert that Chapman was a Manchurian Candidate style programmed assassin, possibly programmed via or a variation of CIA MK Ultra type thing. In all official accounts of the Manson family, it's claimed that Charles Manson was inspired by the Beatles' 1968 White Album, particularly the track Helter Skelter. Now, another influence on Manson was the writings of the famous science fiction author Robert Heinlein. Heinlein was a notable denizen of Laurel Canyon. He lived at 8775 Lookout Mountain Avenue, literally just around the corner from Lookout Mountain Studios. His book, Stranger in a Strange Land, 1961, was hugely influential on many of those people connected to the Laurel Canyon scene and the wider counterculture movement of the 1960s. The following is taken from Rudy Rucker's 1990 Los Angeles Times article, Grok and the World Groks With You, Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. Quote, one of the Stranger of Strange Land's many hippies fans was none other than Charles Manson. According to Ed Sanders' Cool the Family, one of Manson's sons was christened Valentine Michael Manson, and the family's nickname for Charlie's parole officer was Jubal. When Manson was captured in Death Valley, his backpack held 64 movie magazines and a copy of Stranger in a Strange Land. Valentine Michael was born April 15th, 1968. Before I bring this video to a close, I want to mention one other figure in this, very famous one that I have talked about in many of my videos, that of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. Now, Roddenberry wasn't actually a resident of Laurel Canyon, but he did have substantial connections to the canyon scene. He was very close friends with Canyonite Jerry Brown, the 34th and 39th governor of California, which is actually the location of Laurel Canyon, and his father, Edmund Gerald Pat Brown Sr., the 32nd governor of California from 1959 to 1967. Pat Brown was the godson to Roddenberry's son, Eugene Wesley Rod Roddenberry Jr. Rod Roddenberry is currently running the Roddenberry Foundation, which is a group that's got money coming in from all sorts of sources and being dispersed to all kinds of sources. I highly recommend people looking into that foundation. I don't want to cast any aspersions on it. People go and check it out for yourself, see what you think. He's also an executive producer named on all of the current iterations of the Alex Kurtzman era of Star Trek. Another close friend of Gene Roddenberry was Roger Vadim, and following Barbarella, Roger Vadim and Roddenberry collaborated on a debauched film project called Pretty Maids All in a Row from 1971. Vadim directed it whilst Roddenberry produced and wrote the screenplay. It was a dramatisation of a 1968 novel by Francis Pollini. Despite their now classic cult status, Vadim's late 60s films Spirits of the Dead, Barbarella, they were all box office flops. And Pretty Maids in a Row actually changed that. And according to Wikipedia, again, as I always say in these videos, not the best source on these things, but it does give you a generic snapshot of the situation. Pretty Maids All in a Row was a critical and box office success. A dark sex comedy produced by Gene Roddenberry and featuring Rock Hudson as a high school teacher, a, shall we say, the P word, and a serial killer of slutty underage girls. The film is a very, very strange affair indeed. It actually does sound like standard fare for the likes of those who are associated with the Laurel Canyon scene. It's not something that people regularly associate Gene Roddenberry with, but you might be surprised to learn that that wasn't the only credit that Roddenberry received for a film, TV type production that had those kinds of themes in it. His 1976-1977 TV film Spectre, it's replete with references to things like the Hellfire Club, Secret Society. For the time, it actually had quite graphic and ritualistic orgy sacrifice scene in it. People often wax lyrical about Gene Roddenberry. I've got a lot of different opinions on Gene Roddenberry, but there are some very strange accusations that have been made about him recently. These things merged as a result of an interview with Gene Roddenberry dated August 14th, 1988. I'll put the link up on the screen for those people who want to go and check it out. If you read through the comments there, people will point to certain points in the quite late in the video where he's talking about things that could be interpreted as being very disturbing, may have cast Gene Roddenberry in a different light. I can't really talk about what those things are here because it would probably get this video removed very, very quickly from YouTube. But I suggest going and checking it out and see what you make of it. But going back to Pretty Maids All in a Row, that was actually Roger Vadim's first American-made film, and it was long rumoured to have been planned to include Jane Fonda in a prominent role. By the time of the production, Vadim had become increasingly estranged from Jane Fonda. Vadim announced that there was going to be no role for her in the film, and that film would essentially become Roddenberry's only feature-length film, full-on writing credits, as it were, other than his partial accreditation for Star Trek the Motion Picture. One final little note I want to make here, that extending the earlier themes of the Beatles and Laurel Canyon, Gene Roddenberry was also friends with Paul McCartney, and according to Gary McGee in his book Band on the Run, A History of Paul McCartney and Wings, in November 1976 it was announced in trade publications that Wings would perform in a science fiction musical. Paul had met with Gene Roddenberry, which had resulted in a proposed film project, but the plans fell through. There are many, many other connections to science fiction and the genre that are also associated with Laurel Canyon. One biggie there is George Lucas, but I'm going to tease that for another video because that's quite a complex story. That's something I will definitely get into in another video. But please look into this subject. Please check it out, see what you think of it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, share, subscribe. I truly, truly appreciate it. If you're interested in my alternative knowledge research, you might want to check out my books. They're available from Lulu Publishing and Amazon.com. The links are available in the description for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again very, very soon. Bye-bye for now.